The divorce papers sat between them on the dining table, beside the same coffee cups they had used every morning for years. Daniel Cross believed he was finally freeing himself from a wife who had brought him no status, no connections, and no value. He never noticed the quiet woman signing those papers already had the power to decide the future of his failing family company. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Before Daniel Cross lost everything, he had spent years believing he was the one holding everything together. For nearly 7 years, Daniel had been the face of Cross Manufacturing, a family company built by his grandfather and carried through generations. The company name still appeared on office buildings, supplier contracts, and industry magazines. To outsiders, it looked like an established American business with a proud history, but inside the walls of the company, the reality was different. The machines were aging, debt was growing. Several major clients had started looking elsewhere. The company was surviving more on reputation than strength. Daniel refused to admit it. He believed the Cross name alone was enough to protect him, and beside him, quietly watching everything unfold, was his wife, Evelyn Hart. To Daniel, Evelyn was ordinary. She dressed simply. She avoided expensive restaurants, unless there was a reason to attend. She drove a reliable car instead of a luxury vehicle. She rarely talked about her family, her past, or her personal achievements. His friends often joked that Daniel had married someone who was comfortable disappearing into the background. Daniel never defended her. At first, Evelyn thought he was simply proud and ambitious. She believed his confidence came from pressure, from carrying the responsibility of a family business that had been passed down to him. She had been wrong. Over time, Daniel started confusing her quiet nature with weakness. When she offered thoughtful opinions about the company, he smiled as if she had made a harmless mistake. When she asked questions about financial decisions, he reminded her that business was complicated. When his family gathered for dinners, his mother, Victoria Cross, often spoke about Evelyn as if she were a guest instead of family. She never openly insulted her. She did something worse. She made Evelyn feel invisible. Victoria would praise women who attended business events, women who came from wealthy families, women who could open doors. Then she would casually mention how lucky Evelyn was to have married into the Cross family. Daniel heard those comments, hence, he never stopped them. Evelyn noticed, but she stayed calm, not because she lacked options, because she had chosen patience. Years earlier, when she married Daniel, she made a decision that surprised everyone who knew her true background. She wanted one relationship in her life where people did not treat her differently because of her family name. Her father had built Hartwell Capital into one of the most powerful private investment groups in the country. Through careful acquisitions, private holdings, and long-term investments, the company had become a financial force that rarely appeared in public conversations. Evelyn had grown up around boardrooms and negotiations. She understood contracts, mergers, and corporate strategy better than most executives twice her age. But after marrying Daniel, she kept that part of herself hidden. She wanted to know whether someone could love Evelyn Hart, not the woman attached to Hartwell Capital. Daniel had once seemed like that person. That was why she stayed longer than she should have. She remembered the man he was before the pressure changed him, the man who listened when she spoke, the man who believed loyalty mattered more than appearances. But somewhere along the way, Daniel became obsessed with proving himself. And the more insecure he became, the more he blamed the person closest to him. Evelyn had noticed the changes in his behavior long before anyone else. Late nights at the office, secretive phone calls, new friendships with wealthy investors, conversations that stopped whenever she entered the room. She did not accuse him without proof. That was not who she was. Instead, she watched, she listened, and she quietly protected herself. One evening, Daniel came home after another difficult meeting with the company board. He dropped his briefcase near the door and barely acknowledged her. "The investors are losing confidence," he said. Evelyn looked up from the documents she was reviewing. "Then maybe the company needs a different strategy." Daniel laughed. Not loudly, not angrily. The kind of laugh that made her feel smaller. You always think everything can be solved with paperwork. Evelyn closed the folder. Sometimes paperwork reveals problems people refuse to see. His expression changed. For a moment, she saw frustration behind his confidence. Then it disappeared. You know, Evelyn, this is exactly the problem. She waited. You have no idea what it takes to run something like this. The words stayed with her. Not because they hurt her pride, because they showed her how little he understood her. He did not know that some of the same investors he was trying to impress had already spoken with her team. He did not know that a private investment group had been watching cross-manufacturing for months. He did not know that several financial analysts had already identified the company's biggest weaknesses. And he definitely did not know who controlled the group preparing to acquire the company. Evelyn kept those facts to herself. For now, because she still wanted to believe Daniel would choose honesty before everything collapsed. But Daniel was moving in the opposite direction. A few weeks later, he started spending more time with a woman named Lauren Pierce, a wealthy business consultant known for helping executives build stronger professional networks. At least, that was how Daniel described her. Evelyn noticed the difference immediately. Daniel spoke to Lauren with admiration. He listened to her ideas. He valued her opinions, the same opinions he dismissed when they came from his wife. Lauren represented everything Daniel believed he needed: connections, status, recognition. She made him feel like the powerful businessman he wanted the world to see. And slowly, Daniel began convincing himself that Evelyn was the reason he felt stuck. The irony was that Evelyn had spent years helping him survive without him ever knowing. She reviewed reports he ignored. She noticed risks his executives missed. She quietly prevented mistakes from becoming disasters. But she never took credit, because she had wanted a marriage built on trust, not dependence. That choice was about to cost her. One night, Daniel received an email that changed the direction of cross-manufacturing forever. A major investment group had submitted interest in acquiring the company. For Daniel, it looked like salvation, a chance to protect the family name, a chance to prove everyone wrong. He did not know the acquisition was not a rescue from outside. It was the beginning of a truth he had spent years refusing to see. The next morning, Evelyn's private attorney sent her a message. The subject line contained only 4 words: board meeting confirmed. Tomorrow. Evelyn stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she quietly closed her laptop. Because tomorrow, Daniel Cross would finally meet the person who had been standing behind the company he thought he owned. The next morning, Daniel Cross arrived at Cross Manufacturing earlier than usual. He wanted the building to remind him who he was. The polished lobby, the company name carved into the stone wall, the portraits of previous Cross executives hanging above the reception area. Every detail represented decades of family history. For a few minutes, standing there in his expensive suit, Daniel felt like the man he always believed he was. A leader, a successor, someone who belonged at the top. But the feeling disappeared when he entered the executive floor and saw the tension on his employees' faces. People stopped talking when he walked by. Phones lowered. Conversations ended. Daniel noticed, but he blamed the wrong thing. He thought they were nervous about the acquisition process. He thought they were afraid of change. He never considered that many of them were afraid, because they knew the company was closer to failure than he wanted anyone to admit. Inside his office, Daniel found a message waiting from Lauren Pierce. The subject line was simple: "Today is important." He smiled slightly. Lauren had a way of making every moment feel like an opportunity. She was everything Daniel believed Evelyn was not: confident, connected, respected. When Lauren entered a room, people paid attention. When Evelyn entered a room, Daniel had spent years teaching himself not to notice. That difference had become impossible for him to ignore. Lauren had spent the last few months convincing him that his marriage was holding him back. Not directly. She was smarter than that. She never attacked Evelyn openly. She used small comments. "You deserve someone who understands your world. Successful men need partners who can move with them. You shouldn't have to apologize for wanting more." Every sentence sounded supportive. Every sentence fed the insecurity Daniel already carried. By the time he met with the acquisition representatives, he had convinced himself he was making a difficult but necessary choice. The company needed stronger leadership. His personal life needed a fresh start. And Evelyn, in his mind, represented the quiet years he wanted to leave behind. He did not know Evelyn had already seen the acquisition documents. She had reviewed them 3 days earlier, not because she was spying on Daniel, because she was part of the investment group evaluating cross-manufacturing. Her legal team had warned her that the situation would become complicated once Daniel realized who controlled the transaction. Evelyn had asked them to wait. She wanted one more chance to see what Daniel would choose when money, pressure, and pride were involved. She wanted to know whether the man she married was still somewhere beneath the ambition. So far, she had her answer. That afternoon, Evelyn sat alone in the small home office she rarely used. The room looked nothing like the executive offices connected to Hartwell Capital. There were no awards, no expensive artwork, no signs of influence. Only books, documents, and a simple desk near the window. That was exactly how she wanted it. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed a name she knew well, Nathan Brooks, her family's longtime legal advisor. Evelyn answered quietly, "Nathan." "Evelyn, I need confirmation before tomorrow's board review." She looked down at the acquisition file sitting beside her. "About the voting rights?" "Yes." "The controlling interest transfer. The board members at Hartwell are aligned, but they want to make sure you understand the personal conflict involved." Evelyn was silent for a moment. She understood what he meant. The transaction was business. But Daniel would experience it as something personal. "You're asking if I want to separate emotion from the decision. I'm asking if you are prepared for what happens when he learns the truth." Evelyn looked around the room, at the quiet house, at the wedding photo sitting inside a drawer instead of displayed on the wall. For years, she had protected Daniel from consequences he never knew existed. She had protected his reputation, his company, his confidence, but she had slowly disappeared in the process. "I'm prepared," she said. Nathan paused. "You're sure?" "No," Evelyn admitted. "But I know I can't keep protecting someone who refuses to respect me." The honesty surprised even her. For the first time in months, she felt the weight of her own decision. Not revenge, not anger, a boundary. After the call ended, Evelyn opened a folder she had kept locked away. Inside were copies of financial reports, communications, and internal assessments about cross-manufacturing. She had not collected them to destroy Daniel. She had collected them because she knew the company's collapse would affect hundreds of employees who had nothing to do with his choices. That was the difference between her and Daniel. He saw the company as a symbol of his success. She saw the people depending on it. Later that evening, Daniel came home with an energy Evelyn had not seen in a long time. Confidence. But it was different. It was not the confidence of someone who had solved a problem. It was the confidence of someone who believed he had found a way out. "I had a great meeting today," he said, placing his keys on the counter. Evelyn looked up from the kitchen table. "That's good. They are impressed with my vision." She noticed the way he said it. My vision. Not our future. Not our company. Not our family. She stayed quiet. Daniel walked closer. "You know, things are moving in the right direction." Evelyn studied his face. "Are they?" The question irritated him. "What does that mean?" "It means sometimes a solution can look good before you understand the cost." Daniel gave a small, frustrated laugh. "This is what I mean, Evelyn. You always make things more complicated." She folded the document in front of her. "And you always assume things are simple because you don't want to look deeper." His expression hardened. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel said something that revealed how far he had already gone. "You know, Lauren understands what I'm trying to build." The words were quiet, almost casual, but they landed harder because of how easily he said them. Evelyn felt something inside her finally become still. Not broken. Still, you talk about her often. Daniel looked away. "She's a professional connection." "Is that what you call it?" His silence answered before he did. Evelyn had suspected. Now she knew. She did not cry. She did not accuse him. She did not give him the emotional reaction he expected. That seemed to bother him more. "You're not even going to ask?" Evelyn looked at him. Would you tell me the truth if I did? Daniel had no answer. For the first time, he looked uncomfortable. But instead of admitting anything, he became defensive. You've changed. Evelyn almost smiled. No one had ever said something so accurate while meaning something completely different. She had changed. She had stopped begging someone to see her. The next morning, Daniel made a decision. He called his attorney. He requested a private meeting, and before leaving for work, he placed an envelope on the kitchen table. Evelyn saw it immediately. She knew what it was before touching it. The weight, the shape, the careful placement. Divorce papers. Daniel believed this was the moment he would finally take control of his life. He believed Evelyn would be shocked. He believed she would fight to keep a marriage he no longer valued. Instead, she opened the envelope calmly. Then her phone buzzed. A message from Nathan appeared. Emergency board session confirmed. The acquisition agreement will be finalized tomorrow. All controlling shareholders must be present. Evelyn looked from the divorce papers to the message. Daniel had no idea that while he was preparing to leave his wife behind, he was walking directly into the room where she held the power to decide his company's future. Daniel expected a reaction. He had imagined several versions of this moment. In one version, Evelyn would cry. In another, she would become angry and demand an explanation. Maybe she would finally admit that she needed him. That was the part Daniel wanted most. Not the divorce itself, the proof that he still mattered. But Evelyn only looked at the papers in front of her with a calmness that made him uncomfortable. She turned the first page, then the second. She noticed the careful language, the legal formatting, the way his attorney had structured the agreement to protect Daniel's interests. It was professional, cold, prepared, which meant he had been thinking about leaving for longer than he admitted. I see, she said quietly. Daniel crossed his arms. That's it? Evelyn looked up. What did you expect? I expected you to at least ask why. She studied him for a moment. I think you already decided why. The answer bothered him because it was true. Daniel looked away. He had spent months building a story in his head. Evelyn was holding him back. Evelyn did not understand ambition. Evelyn was comfortable with a smaller life. Leaving her was not betrayal. It was growth. At least, that was what he told himself. You know what the hardest part is? Daniel said. I tried to include you in my world. Evelyn almost reacted. Almost. Because the sentence was so far from reality. For years, she had sat beside him during business dinners. She had reviewed reports when he asked for help. She had listened to his frustrations after difficult meetings. But every time she offered real insight, he treated it like interference. I was always in your world, Daniel. No, he replied quickly. You were around it. The difference between those words hurt more than she expected. Because it explained everything. Daniel had never wanted a partner. He wanted someone who admired him. Someone who never challenged his decisions. Someone who made him feel successful. Evelyn placed the papers back on the table. I'll have Nathan review everything. Daniel frowned. Nathan? My attorney. That surprised him. Not because Evelyn needed a lawyer, because he had never considered she would have one. In Daniel's mind, Evelyn was a woman who avoided conflict, a person who would quietly accept whatever happened. He did not understand that patience and weakness were not the same thing. Fine, he said. Have him review it. The way he said it suggested he believed there was nothing to review. That confidence came from ignorance. He did not know Evelyn's financial situation. He did not know the protections surrounding her personal assets. He did not know that years earlier, before their wedding, her family's legal team had created agreements specifically designed to separate her identity from her wealth. Daniel had signed documents he barely read because he assumed they were unnecessary. He assumed Evelyn had nothing worth protecting. That assumption was the foundation of everything that was about to happen. Later that afternoon, Daniel met with Lauren Pierce at an upscale restaurant downtown. He chose the location carefully. It was one of the places where executives, investors, and wealthy professionals gathered. A place where people noticed who entered. A place where Daniel wanted to be seen. Lauren arrived 10 minutes late. Daniel did not mind. He liked that about her. To him, her confidence looked like power. She signed? Lauren asked after sitting down. Daniel smiled. She didn't fight. Lauren relaxed. Good. The simple approval made Daniel feel like he had made the right decision. She always acted like she was above all of this, he said. Like money and reputation didn't matter. Lauren stirred her drink. Some people say that because they don't have access to either. Daniel laughed. Exactly the reaction he wanted. Someone who understood him. Someone who agreed with him. You know, Lauren continued, this acquisition could completely change your position. Daniel leaned forward. You think so? I know so. If the new Richest keep you as CEO, you'll have the resources to rebuild. The possibility energized him. For the first time in months, Daniel imagined the future without feeling trapped. A larger office, more respect, a stronger reputation, a wife who could stand beside him at important events. Although he never said Evelyn's name, both of them understood what he meant. Lauren had replaced his dissatisfaction with excitement, and Daniel was too focused on the future to question why she was so interested in his success. Meanwhile, Evelyn sat across from Nathan Brooks in a quiet conference room at Hartwell Capital's private legal office. The building itself was intentionally discreet. No giant signs, no flashy entrance, no public display of wealth. That had always been her family's philosophy. Real power did not need to announce itself. Nathan placed several documents on the table. The acquisition committee is ready, he said. Evelyn nodded. And cross-manufacturing? They are in a vulnerable position. Their debt structure is worse than reported. Several liabilities were hidden through short-term financing. She looked through the documents. Daniel knows? Nathan hesitated. He knows the company is struggling. That's not what I asked. Nathan looked at her carefully. No, he doesn't know the full extent. Evelyn closed the folder. That answer hurt more than she wanted to admit. Not because Daniel had failed. Businesses failed every day. Because he had chosen pride over honesty. He had hidden problems from employees, from investors, from his own family, and from her. Will the acquisition protect the employees? Yes. The suppliers? Yes. Then proceed. Nathan watched her carefully. You still care about the company. I care about the people who depend on it. That was the difference Daniel never understood. He saw ownership. Evelyn saw responsibility. Before leaving, Nathan handed her one more document. This came from the crossboard. She opened it. It was a list of attendees for the emergency meeting. Her eyes moved down the page. Daniel Cross, Victoria Cross, Lauren Pierce. Evelyn stared at it for a moment. Then stared at it for a moment. Seeing her name there felt strange. Not because she was afraid. Because she realized the moment she had avoided for years was finally arriving. The moment Daniel would have to meet the woman behind the decisions he thought were happening around him. That evening, Evelyn returned home later than usual. Daniel was already there. But he was not alone. Lauren was sitting in the living room. Evelyn stopped at the doorway. Daniel looked slightly uncomfortable. Only slightly. Evelyn, he said, standing up. Lauren came by to discuss the transition. The explanation was weak. Even Daniel seemed to know it. Lauren offered a polite smile. I hope this isn't a bad time. Evelyn looked at her, then at Daniel. The woman who was supposed to be a professional connection was sitting comfortably inside their home. The home Evelyn had helped create. The home where Daniel had just placed divorce papers on the table that morning. For a moment, Evelyn felt the old pain return. Not anger, disappointment. Because she finally understood something. Daniel was not leaving because he had found someone better. He was leaving because he believed he had found someone who matched the image he wanted. Evelyn picked up her coat. I'll leave you both to discuss business. Daniel looked surprised. That's all you're going to say? She paused. Yes. Her calmness unsettled him more than an argument would have. After she left, Lauren watched the door close. Then she looked at Daniel. She's taking this strangely well. Daniel smiled. She always has. But neither of them noticed the message that arrived on Daniel's phone moments later. It was from the acquisition firm. The subject line was short. Final confirmation required. Daniel opened it casually. Then his expression changed, because attached to the email was the official attendee list for tomorrow's board meeting. And for the first time, he saw the name of the person who would be leading the acquisition discussion. Evelyn Hart. Daniel read the email 3 times. The name at the bottom did not change. Evelyn Hart. For several seconds, he simply stared at the screen, waiting for his mind to correct what his eyes had seen. It did not. He closed the email and opened it again. The same information appeared. The acquisition meeting would be led by representatives from Hartwell Capital. The controlling shareholder would attend personally. Evelyn Hart would be present. Daniel leaned back in his chair. A strange feeling moved through him. Not fear. Not yet. Confusion, because the name felt familiar, but not in the way it should have. There were thousands of people named Evelyn Hart in America. That did not mean anything. His wife was Evelyn Hart. A woman who worked quietly, a woman who avoided attention, a woman who had never once mentioned involvement with a major investment group. Daniel convinced himself it had to be someone else. It was easier than considering the alternative, because the alternative would mean that everything he believed about his marriage was wrong, and Daniel was not ready to face that. He forwarded the email to his assistant with one sentence. Confirm if this is the same person. Then he stood up and looked through the glass wall of his office. Below him, employees moved through the building that carried his family name. For years, Daniel had walked through those halls believing he was the person everyone depended on. Now, for the first time, he wondered if he had been seeing only the version of reality that made him comfortable. The thought annoyed him. He pushed it away. By the time he left work, he had already created another explanation. Evelyn must have some connection. Maybe she knew someone at Hartwell. Maybe she had inherited a small amount of money. Maybe she had hidden a family relationship. But none of those possibilities made sense. And deep down, Daniel knew why. Because people with real power did not usually spend years pretending to be invisible. At least, that was what he believed. He did not understand that Evelyn had never been hiding because she was ashamed. She had been hiding because she wanted something money could not buy. A normal relationship. A husband who chose her without knowing what came with her name. The next morning, Daniel arrived at Cross Manufacturing for the board meeting. He expected tension. He expected difficult conversations. But he also expected control. That was the difference. Daniel still believed he was walking into a room where he had influence. His father, Richard Cross, was already there. So was Victoria. His mother looked more confident than worried. "The investors are here?" Daniel asked. Richard nodded. They arrived early. Good. Daniel adjusted his jacket. This could be the turning point. Richard studied him. "You sound very certain." "I am." His father did not respond. Because Richard had spent the last few weeks looking at numbers Daniel refused to see. The company was not simply struggling. It was losing ground. The acquisition was not a partnership. It was a takeover. Daniel had convinced himself it was an opportunity because accepting the truth would mean admitting he had failed. The conference room doors opened. Several executives entered. Among them was Nathan Brooks. Daniel recognized him immediately. Not personally, professionally. Nathan was known in business circles as one of the most careful corporate attorneys in the country. He did not represent struggling companies. He represented powerful people. Daniel noticed the respect everyone showed him. Then he noticed something else. Nathan looked toward the door, as if waiting for someone important. A few minutes later, the room became quiet. Evelyn walked in. Daniel felt the air leave his chest. For a moment, he forgot where he was. His wife stood at the end of the conference table, wearing a simple dark suit. Nothing flashy, nothing designed to impress. She looked exactly like the woman he had seen every morning. The same woman he had underestimated, the same woman he had left divorce papers for, but the room reacted differently. Executives stood, board members greeted her. Nathan stepped forward immediately. "Ms. Hart, not Evelyn, not Mrs. Cross, Ms. Hart." Daniel noticed. And for the first time, something inside him shifted. Because people were not treating Evelyn like a guest. They were treating her like the person in charge. Still, he refused to accept what was happening. He told himself there had to be another explanation. Maybe she was representing someone. Maybe she was here because of a legal matter. Maybe she had somehow become connected to the transaction. But then Nathan placed a folder on the table. "We can begin the acquisition review." Daniel looked around. "Before we start," he said, forcing a confident tone, "I think there may be some confusion." The room became quiet. Evelyn looked at him, not with anger, That bothered him more. Confusion? Nathan asked. Daniel nodded. My wife is attending this meeting, I understand that. But I'm not sure why she is involved in the acquisition process. No one answered immediately. That silence felt heavier than a response. Evelyn remained calm. I'm involved because I approved the acquisition. Daniel almost laughed. The sentence was too impossible. What? She looked at him. I approved it. He stared at her. You? Several people in the room shifted uncomfortably. Daniel heard the disbelief in his own voice. Not because he wanted to insult her, because his mind could not connect the woman standing before him with the power everyone else clearly recognized. Evelyn did not react. I understand this is unexpected. Unexpected. That word made him angry, because it was more than unexpected. It was humiliating. Years of believing he was above her, years of speaking to her like she had no understanding of business. And now she was sitting across from him with the authority he had spent his entire life chasing. But she still had not revealed everything. She still had not told him the full truth. The meeting continued. Documents were reviewed. Financial concerns were discussed. Nathan explained the company's debt exposure and operational risks. Daniel listened in disbelief as Evelyn asked questions that revealed a deeper understanding of cross-manufacturing than some executives inside the company would. She knew the supplier issues. She knew the debt structure. She knew which divisions were profitable and which ones were being protected only because of family pride. Daniel felt something uncomfortable she had always known, not recently, not by accident. Always. When the meeting ended, most executives left quietly. Daniel stayed. Evelyn gathered her documents. You knew, he said. She paused. Yes. The answer was simple. Too simple. You knew what was happening with the company? Yes. And you never told me? Evelyn looked at him. I tried. Daniel frowned. When? When I asked questions. When I offered solutions. When I warned you about decisions that were putting the company at risk. That's different. No, she said quietly. It isn't. The room became silent. Daniel wanted to argue. He wanted to say she had deceived him, that she had manipulated him. But another thought interrupted him. How many times had he ignored her because he had already decided she had nothing valuable to say? Evelyn picked up her folder. I didn't hide my identity to hurt you, Daniel. Then why? Her expression changed slightly. Not anger. Pain. Because I wanted one person in my life to love me without knowing what I owned. Daniel had no answer. For the first time, the possibility entered his mind that Evelyn had not been playing a game. She had been protecting something he had destroyed himself. Before he could respond, Nathan returned to the conference room. His expression was serious. Evelyn, we need to discuss one issue before tomorrow's announcement. She turned. What issue? Nathan placed another document on the table. Daniel looked at the paper. He could not read the details from where he stood, but he saw the heading. It was not about the acquisition. It was about cross-manufacturing's internal investigation. Nathan looked between Evelyn and Daniel. The board discovered evidence that company funds may have been redirected without proper approval. Daniel's face changed, because suddenly this was no longer about losing control. It was about what he had done while believing no one would ever look closely. Daniel did not speak for several seconds. The words remained in the room. Company funds may have been redirected without proper approval. He looked at Nathan, then at Evelyn, then at the documents on the table. His first instinct was anger, not guilt, not concern. Anger that this was happening in front of her. You're investigating me? Daniel asked. Nathan stayed calm. The board is reviewing financial activity connected to executive accounts. That's not an answer. It is the answer. Daniel's jaw tightened. He looked toward Evelyn. You knew about this? Evelyn did not respond immediately. That silence bothered him more than a denial, because Daniel was used to controlling conversations. He was used to people explaining themselves to him. But Evelyn was no longer doing that. I knew there were concerns, she said. Concerns? His rose. You were watching me. No. Then what? Evelyn looked at him steadily. I was watching the company. The distinction was simple, but Daniel hated it, because for the first time, he realized Evelyn had never been focused on him personally. She had been focused on the consequences of his decisions, something he had never done. Daniel pushed the folder away. This is ridiculous. You're making assumptions based on incomplete information. Nathan opened another file. We are not making assumptions. The board reviewed transfer records, expense reports, and approval history. Daniel looked at the papers. He recognized some of the documents, not all of them. That made his stomach tighten. He remembered the accounts, the transfers, the decisions he had considered temporary. The money he moved to cover personal expenses during difficult months. He had always planned to replace it. That was what he told himself. But time passed. The company struggled, and the money never returned. You're making this sound worse than it is, Daniel said. Nathan looked at him. That depends on what you believe it is. The sentence felt like an accusation. Daniel stood. This is my family's company. Evelyn watched him carefully. There it was, the phrase he always used. My department, my family, my legacy. But he never said the words that mattered. The employees, the suppliers, the people who trusted the business. You're right, Evelyn said quietly. Daniel looked surprised. Then she continued. It was your family's company. That is why I wanted to save it. The words stopped him. Save it, not take it, not destroy it, save it. But Daniel was too defensive to hear the difference. You expect me to believe you were helping me? I did help you. His expression changed. Because that was the one thing he could not easily dismiss. For years, problems had disappeared before they became disasters. Loans had been extended. Contracts had appeared. Investors had shown unexpected patience. He had called it good timing, good instincts, good leadership. He had never considered another explanation. You're saying you were behind those deals? Evelyn remained silent. She did not need to answer. That silence was enough. Daniel felt something uncomfortable, a memory, not a happy one, a painful one. Every time Evelyn had warned him about a decision, he had laughed. Every time she had asked questions, he had told her she did not understand business. Now he wondered how many times she had protected him from consequences he never knew existed. But instead of gratitude, shame appeared first, and Daniel hated feeling ashamed. So what now? He asked. Evelyn looked at him. Now the board decides what happens next. You mean you decide? No. Her voice was calm. The board decides based on evidence. That answer frustrated him because it was fair. He wanted Evelyn to admit she was punishing him. He wanted a reason to hate her. But she was not giving him one. She was simply allowing reality to catch up. Outside the conference room, the situation was already changing. Employees had started hearing rumors. Executives were asking questions. Senior managers who once followed Daniel without hesitation were suddenly requesting financial reviews. The company that had always protected the Cross name was beginning to protect itself instead. Daniel felt the shift, and he hated how quickly it happened. For years, he believed power came from being the person everyone needed. Now he was discovering something else. Power also came from being the person everyone trusted, and trust was something he had spent years damaging. Later that afternoon, Daniel returned to his office. The room looked exactly the same, his desk, his awards, his family photos, but everything felt different. He opened the drawer where he kept personal documents. He searched through old files. Then he stopped. A document caught his attention. The original marriage agreement. He had almost forgotten about it. When he and Evelyn married, her attorneys had insisted on a detailed agreement separating personal assets. Daniel remembered finding it excessive. At the time, he had laughed privately. Why would Evelyn need protection? She was not wealthy. She was not connected to powerful people. She was simply careful. That was what he thought. Now, holding the document, he felt a different emotion. Uncertainty. He read through the pages again. Most of it was standard. Separate property. Independent assets. Protection of inherited interests. Inherited interests. The phrase stayed in his mind. He had ignored it 5 years earlier because he assumed there was nothing behind it. Now he wondered what else he had ignored. His phone rang. It was his mother. Daniel answered immediately. Mom. Her voice sounded tense. Where are you? At the office. Is it true? Daniel froze. Is what true? That Evelyn is involved with the acquisition. He looked toward the window. How did you hear that? Everyone is talking. His mother lowered her voice. Daniel, who is she? The question irritated him, because it was the same question he had started asking himself. She's my wife. That's not what I mean. He said nothing. Victoria continued. Your father spoke with people from the investment group. They don't talk about her like an employee. They talk about her like she owns the room. Daniel closed his eyes. I'll handle it. But even as he said the words, he knew he no longer had control. After the call ended, another message appeared. This time from Lauren. Call me. Something is wrong. Daniel stared at the screen. For the first time, Lauren's confidence was gone. She sounded worried. He called immediately. What happened? There was a pause, then Lauren spoke. I just found out who Hartwell Capital really reports to. Daniel waited. Daniel, her voice became quieter. The person behind the acquisition isn't just an investor. His grip tightened around the phone. What are you saying? Lauren took a breath. The company buying Cross Manufacturing doesn't answer to a group of executives. A pause. It answers to Evelyn Hart. Daniel stood completely still. He had heard those words before, but hearing them from Lauren made them different. Because Lauren was the person who had encouraged him to leave Evelyn. The person who had convinced him he was choosing a better future. And now even she sounded afraid. How do you know? Lauren hesitated. I saw the ownership structure. Daniel felt his heartbeat change. Tell me. Another pause. Then Lauren said the words that finally cracked the version of reality he had built. Daniel, your wife isn't connected to Hartwell Capital. She owns it. Daniel did not sleep that night. The sentence from Lauren kept repeating in his mind. She owns it, not controls it, not works with it, owns it. He sat alone in his apartment, surrounded by everything he had once considered proof of success. The expensive furniture, the city view, the private collection of watches displayed in his office. None of it felt impressive anymore, because every object around him reminded him of the same thing. He had spent years judging Evelyn by what he could see, and he had been completely wrong. His first reaction was disbelief. His second was anger. But underneath both was something Daniel refused to admit. Fear. Because if Evelyn was powerful enough to own Hartwell Capital, then every conversation they had ever had looked different. Every argument, every decision, every time he dismissed her opinion, every time he called her simple. He had not been speaking to someone who knew nothing. He had been speaking to someone who knew more than him and chose silence. The next morning, Daniel drove to the Cross family office before the board meeting. He needed answers. Not from Evelyn. Not yet. He was not ready for that conversation. He needed someone who would confirm that this was all a misunderstanding. His father was already there. Richard Cross looked exhausted. Daniel walked into the office without knocking. You knew. Richard looked up. Knew what? You knew about Evelyn. A long silence followed. That silence told Daniel everything. You knew, Daniel repeated. Richard slowly removed his glasses. I knew she was not who you thought she was. Daniel felt his anger rise. And you said nothing? What was I supposed to say? That my wife was secretly connected to one of the largest investment groups in the country. Richard shook his head. No. I should have told you that you were making the biggest mistake of your life. Daniel stared at him. You're blaming me? Richard's expression hardened. I'm telling you the truth. The words felt worse than an accusation, because Richard was not defending Evelyn. He was not attacking Daniel. He was simply done protecting him. You saw her every day, Richard continued. You saw how she handled problems. You saw how people respected her. You saw how she understood things you never bothered to learn. Daniel looked away. Richard continued. You called it quiet because you thought loud people were stronger. That sentence stayed with him. Because it sounded like something Evelyn would say. Not with anger. With disappointment. Daniel left the office before the conversation became something he could not control. The board meeting began 2 hours later. This time, Daniel entered the room differently. Not as the person who expected to lead. As someone trying to understand how much he had already lost. Evelyn sat at the opposite side of the table. She looked calm. That bothered him. He expected anger. He expected satisfaction. Instead, she looked like someone handling a difficult business decision. Not someone watching an enemy fall. Nathan began the meeting by reviewing the acquisition terms. Hartwell Capital would acquire a controlling interest in Cross Manufacturing. The company would remain operational. Employees would be protected. Management positions would be reviewed. Daniel focused on one sentence. Management positions would be reviewed. His future was no longer guaranteed. For the first time, he experienced what employees had felt under his leadership. Uncertainty. When the financial review began, several issues appeared. Poor investment decisions, unreported liabilities, unauthorized spending. Daniel tried to explain. Some decisions had been made during difficult periods. Some transfers had been temporary. Some expenses were related to maintaining the company image. But every explanation sounded weaker when spoken aloud, because the numbers did not care about his intentions. They showed the results. After the meeting paused for a short break, Daniel followed Evelyn into the hallway. "Wait," she stopped. But she did not turn immediately. That small action hurt him. Before, she always turned toward him, even when he was wrong. Even when he hurt her, she always gave him her attention. Now she waited because she chose to, not because she had to. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. Evelyn looked at him. The question was different from before, less angry, more desperate. "I want to understand." For a moment she said nothing. Then she answered, "Because I wanted to know if you would value me without knowing what I had." Daniel swallowed, and her eyes softened slightly. Not with forgiveness, with sadness. "I found out." The words hurt more than he expected. Because he knew what she meant. He had failed the test without ever knowing there was one. "I loved you," Daniel said. Evelyn looked away. The timing of the words made them feel empty. "I believe you loved something about me," she replied. "That's not fair." "No?" She looked back at him. "You loved the version of me that made you feel powerful." Daniel had no response, because part of him knew she was right. He loved being the successful husband, the provider, the man who believed he had rescued someone from an ordinary life. He never considered that Evelyn might have been the person rescuing him. "I never wanted your money," he said. "I know." That surprised him. She continued. "That was never the problem." "Then what was?" "The way you treated people when you thought they had nothing to offer you." The hallway became quiet. Daniel looked at her, and for the first time, he understood the real reason she had stayed. Not because she needed him. Because she believed he could become better, and he had chosen not to. Before he could answer, Nathan approached them. "Evelyn, we need you in the conference room." She nodded. Daniel noticed Nathan did not ask, he informed her, another small reminder of the difference between them. Before she walked away, Evelyn looked at Daniel. "The divorce papers will be handled through attorneys." His expression changed. "You're really doing this?" "Yes." "You're not even going to try?" The question sounded almost desperate. Evelyn held his gaze. "I tried for years, then she left." Daniel stood alone in the hallway. For years he had believed leaving Evelyn would be the moment he finally chose himself. Now he wondered if it was the moment he destroyed the one person who had truly chosen him. That afternoon, Daniel returned home and found an envelope waiting. He assumed it was from his attorney. Instead, it was from Hartwell Capital's legal department. His hands tightened as he opened it. Inside was a formal notice. Not about the acquisition, not about the divorce, about the review of his executive conduct. Attached was a list of transactions under investigation. Daniel read the first page, then the second. Then he saw the final attachment, a document he had never seen before, a signed approval request, with his name, and another signature beside it, Evelyn's. Daniel froze, because the date was from 2 years earlier, a date he remembered clearly, the day he had asked Evelyn to stop worrying on business matters, the day he had told her she did not understand how companies worked. His eyes moved to the signature line. Evelyn had not approved the transaction. She had rejected it, and underneath her rejection was a handwritten note from her. A warning he had ignored. Daniel turned the page. At the bottom was a second document, a record showing someone had overridden her decision after that, someone with executive authority, someone whose signature was his. Then his phone rang. It was Nathan. Daniel answered immediately. "Why did you send this?" Nathan's voice was quiet. "Because tomorrow's board session is not only about the acquisition anymore." Daniel felt his stomach tighten. "What does that mean?" A pause. Then Nathan said, "It means Evelyn has decided whether she wants to protect you one more time, or let the board see everything you did." Daniel spent the entire night trying to find a way to explain what happened. Not to the board. Not to Evelyn. To himself. He kept returning to the same thought. She knew. Evelyn had known about the problems inside cross-manufacturing. She had known about the financial risks. She had known about the decisions he made. And she had still stayed. That part confused him more than anything else. If she wanted control, she could have taken it years ago. If she wanted power, she already had it. So why had she spent years sitting quietly beside him while he treated her like someone who needed his protection? The answer was uncomfortable. Because maybe she never wanted control over him. Maybe she wanted respect. And that was something Daniel had never given her. The next morning, the board meeting resumed. This time, Daniel entered the room, knowing he was not the strongest person there. That realization changed everything. Before, he had walked into meetings expecting people to follow his direction. Now he watched faces. He noticed who avoided eye contact, who looked disappointed, who looked relieved. The employees were not the only ones who had been affected by his decisions. The people closest to him had been watching the company decline while he protected his image. Nathan began presenting the findings from the internal review. The details were not dramatic. That was what made them worse. There was no single event that destroyed everything. It was a series of choices. Unnecessary expenses, poor investments, delayed reporting, personal spending connected to company accounts, small decisions that became larger problems because Daniel refused to admit mistakes. He listened as executives discussed numbers that used to feel like abstract figures. Now they represented consequences, jobs, contracts, trust. When Nathan finished, the room became silent. Then one board member spoke. "Daniel, do you have anything you want to add?" Everyone looked at him. For years, he would have answered immediately. He would have defended himself. He would have explained why everyone else misunderstood. But sitting there, with Evelyn across from him, he realized something. Every explanation sounded like another excuse. "I made decisions I thought I could fix later," he said. His voice was quieter than usual. "I thought I could recover." No one interrupted. "I was wrong." Admission surprised everyone, including himself, but it did not change the situation. The board still had a responsibility. The company still needed protection. And Daniel finally understood that accountability was not the same as humiliation. It was simply the result of choices. After the meeting ended, Evelyn remained in the conference room. Daniel waited until everyone else left. "You're really going through with this?" Evelyn gathered her papers. "With the acquisition?" He shook his head. "With removing me." She looked at him. "I'm not removing you. That's what everyone thinks." "No," Evelyn said. "Everyone is deciding what happens based on what the company needs." Daniel laughed softly. "Do you hear yourself?" "What do you mean? You sound exactly like them." Evelyn paused. "Like who?" "Like executives. Investors, people who look at everything numbers." Her expression changed slightly. Because that was the first time Daniel had accused her of becoming what he always wanted to be. Powerful, untouchable. But Evelyn knew the difference. She cared about numbers because numbers represented people. Daniel had cared about numbers because they represented status. "I spent years trying to make you understand that a company is more than a name on a building," she said. Daniel looked away. The words hit because he remembered saying the opposite. He remembered telling her that business was not charity, that feelings did not belong in corporate decisions. Now he saw how incomplete that belief had been. Before he could respond, Evelyn's phone rang. She checked the screen. Her expression changed, only slightly. But Daniel noticed. "Is something wrong? It's my father's estate attorney." Daniel looked surprised. "Your father?" "Yes." She answered the call and stepped away. Daniel stayed where he was. He did not mean to listen, but the room was quiet. He heard only fragments. Confirmed, transfer documents, final beneficiary approval. Then Evelyn looked back at him. The call ended. What was that about? She placed her phone on the table. "Something I need to handle privately." Daniel almost smiled. A month earlier, he would have demanded an answer. Now he stopped himself, because he finally understood something. He was not entitled to every part of her life. Not anymore. That afternoon, Evelyn met with Nathan and the estate attorney in a private office. The conversation was not about cross-manufacturing. It was about something Daniel did not know existed. Her family's final inheritance structure. Her father had not only left her wealth, he had left her responsibility. The documents confirmed that certain shares, trusts, and investment holdings had transferred fully into her control after meeting specific conditions. Nathan reviewed the paperwork carefully. Once these are finalized, your ownership position becomes even stronger. Evelyn nodded. She was not excited. That surprised the attorney. Most people would have been overwhelmed by the scale of what she controlled. But Evelyn had never measured her life by assets. She measured it by choices. I never wanted Daniel to find out this way, she said. Nathan looked at her. But he did. Yes. Do you regret waiting? She thought about it. About the years of silence, about the moments she could have revealed everything, about the hope that maybe Daniel would love the person before the power. No, she finally said. Nathan waited, because if I had told him sooner, I would never know whether he respected me or simply respected what I represented. That answer stayed with him, because it was not about money. It was about dignity. Later that evening, Daniel received another message. This time, it was not from Nathan. It was from Lauren she wanted to meet. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. They met at the same restaurant where they had celebrated the future he thought he was building. The same place where Lauren had told him he deserved someone better. Now she looked different, less confident, more careful. Daniel noticed immediately. You knew more than you told me. Lauren looked down. I suspected. His expression hardened. Suspected? Daniel, I didn't know everything. But you knew enough. Silence. That was enough. You let me believe she was ordinary. Lauren sighed. I believed that, too. No. Daniel leaned forward. You encouraged me. She looked at him, and for the first time, she did not pretend. Yes. The honesty caught him off guard. Why? Lauren looked uncomfortable. Because I thought you were the future. There was no affection in the answer. Only calculation. Daniel understood. She had not chosen him because she saw something special. She chose the version of him she believed would become powerful, and when that version disappeared, her certainty disappeared with it. You never loved me. Lauren did not answer. She did not need to. The silence was enough. Daniel left the restaurant feeling something he had not expected. Not anger, not heartbreak, something closer to clarity. He had spent months believing Evelyn was the person who held him back. But the people around him had only loved the image he created. The real person had been sitting beside him all along, and he had been too arrogant to see her. When he arrived home, there was a letter waiting. No company logo, no attorney information, just his name. Daniel opened it slowly. Inside was a copy of a document from years earlier, a document he had never paid attention to. His marriage agreement, but this time there was an additional page attached. A page that had been sealed from him. At the top was a legal note, disclosure of protected family holdings and beneficial ownership. Daniel's hands tightened, because beneath the legal language was a sentence that changed everything. Evelyn Hart had entered the marriage with assets worth far beyond anything he had ever imagined, and she had signed one final instruction before the wedding. A condition that explained why she had hidden the truth. Daniel read the sentence twice. Then his phone rang. It was Nathan. Daniel answered immediately. What is this? Nathan was silent for a moment. Then he said, Daniel, there is something else you need to know about Evelyn's decision before your divorce is finalized. Daniel remained silent after Nathan finished speaking. The room around him felt smaller. The walls, the furniture, the documents spread across the table. Everything suddenly felt like evidence of a life he had misunderstood. What decision? Daniel finally asked. Nathan looked at him carefully. The decision Evelyn made before the marriage. Daniel frowned. What does that mean? Nathan did not answer immediately. He looked toward the document Daniel had received. She wanted to make sure you were never trapped by her wealth. Daniel stared at him. I don't understand. Before you married Evelyn, her family created a legal structure protecting her inherited assets. But there was one unusual condition. Daniel looked down at the papers again. His hands felt heavier. What condition? Nathan took a breath. She requested that no one reveal her financial identity unless there was a serious threat to her personal security, her company interests, or the people affected by her decisions. Daniel's expression changed. So she planned all of this? No. Nathan shook his head. That is the part you need to understand. Evelyn did not plan for you to fail. The sentence hurt because Daniel knew what Nathan meant. She did not create the situation. She simply stopped protecting him from it. She gave you a chance to love her without knowing, Nathan continued. And she gave herself a chance to know whether you would respect her without being influenced by money. Daniel looked away. He wanted to argue. He wanted to say she should have trusted him. But another thought appeared. How could she trust someone who never tried to understand her? The truth was painful because it did not make Evelyn look cruel. It made her look patient, and that was harder for Daniel to accept. Later that evening, Daniel went to the house. Their house. Although he no longer felt certain it was his. Evelyn was sitting in the living room reviewing documents. She looked up when he entered. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them felt different now. Before, it had been filled with things they avoided. Now it was filled with things they could no longer ignore. You knew. Evelyn closed the folder. Yes. Daniel stood across from her. You were going to tell me? She considered the question. I don't know. That answer surprised him. You don't know? No. She looked down at the documents. Because for a long time, I kept hoping the reason would not matter anymore. Daniel felt a strange pressure in his chest. What does that mean? It means I wanted our marriage to reach a point where my name, my family, and my money were not important. She looked at him. I wanted to be your wife, not your connection. Daniel sat down slowly. The anger he had carried for days was becoming harder to hold. You could have changed everything. Yes. You could have saved the company publicly. Yes. You could have stopped this. Evelyn was quiet. Then she answered. I could have. She did. Honesty surprised him. She did not pretend she was helpless. But I also know that if I kept fixing every problem silently, nothing would change. Daniel looked at her. What was wrong with helping? Nothing. Her voice reminded him, but helping someone is different from carrying them. The words stayed with him, because that was exactly what had happened. Evelyn carried him. She had carried the company. She had carried the consequences of his choices. And he had mistaken her support for weakness. Daniel looked at the floor. What about Lauren? The question came out quieter than he expected. Evelyn did not react. I know. His head lifted. You knew? Yes. When? A while ago. Daniel felt embarrassed. Not because she knew, because he realized how obvious it had been. How long were you going to let me continue? Evelyn looked at him. I was not letting you continue. Then what were you doing? Watching what you chose? Daniel had no answer, because that was the truth. Evelyn had not forced his hand. She had not exposed him. She had not destroyed his relationship with Lauren. She had simply stopped standing between him and the consequences. I thought you were different, Daniel said. Evelyn's expression softened slightly. So did I. That hurt more than anger, because it meant she had once believed in him, and he had proven her wrong. The next day, the board announced the acquisition review publicly. The news spread quickly. Cross Manufacturing had been a respected company for decades. The possibility of new ownership attracted attention from investors, employees, and industry leaders. But the most discussed part was not the acquisition. It was the identity of Hartwell Capital's controlling owner. For years, Hartwell had operated quietly. The company avoided publicity. Its executives rarely appeared in interviews. Its ownership structure remained private. Now, people began asking questions. Who was Evelyn Hart? Daniel saw the headlines from his office. Not because he wanted to. Because they were everywhere. The same people who once described him as a rising business leader were now discussing his wife. The quiet woman. The woman who sat in the background. The woman who had been making decisions far above his level. He felt something he had never experienced before. He was no longer the person everyone was watching, and it frightened him. Meanwhile, Evelyn prepared for the final board presentation. She did not celebrate. She did not enjoy watching Daniel lose control. That was something he still did not understand. She had never wanted him to fail. She wanted him to finally see reality. Before the presentation, Nathan met her privately. There is one more issue. Evelyn looked up. What happened? The divorce response. She already knew. Daniel's attorney filed his position. What did they claim? Nathan opened the file. They are challenging several financial assumptions. Evelyn sighed. Not because she was surprised. Because she was disappointed. Does he believe he has a claim? He believes the marriage gives him access to certain assets. Evelyn looked at the document. The same man who spent years believing she had nothing now wanted what she owned. It was almost painful in its simplicity. Does he know about the agreement? Nathan shook his head. Not the full details. Then he will. That afternoon, Daniel met with his attorney. The conversation did not go the way he expected. I want to protect myself, Daniel said. His attorney looked through the documents. That will depend on what you mean by protect. My marriage, my assets, my reputation. The attorney paused. Daniel, your biggest problem is that you still think this is about money. Daniel frowned. What else would it be about? The attorney closed the folder. Trust. Daniel looked away. He did not want to hear that word, because trust was the one thing he could not buy back. The attorney continued. You signed agreements before marriage. You benefited from Evelyn's support. You were protected from financial collapse without knowing it. Daniel felt his face tighten. She hid everything from me. His attorney looked at him. And you spent 5 years assuming she had nothing. The room went quiet. That sentence ended the argument, because it was true. That evening, Daniel received a final notification. The board meeting would continue the next morning. The subject line was simple: ownership, confirmation, and executive transition. He opened the attachment. The first page showed Hartwell Capital's ownership structure. The second page showed the acquisition authority. The third page contained the decision regarding Cross Manufacturing's future leadership. Daniel read the final section. Then he stopped, because his name was still there, but not where he expected. It was not listed as CEO. It was not listed as chairman. It was listed under one sentence, subject to final review, by controlling shareholder Evelyn Hart, and beneath that sentence was a note from Evelyn herself, a single line. Daniel read it once, then again, because for the first time he realized the woman he had underestimated was not deciding whether she could defeat him. She was deciding whether there was anything left worth saving. The boardroom was quieter than Daniel expected. For years, he had walked into meetings believing he belonged at the center of every decision. He had built his identity around being the person who saved Cross Manufacturing. The problem was that he had never actually known who had been saving him. Now, he sat at the far end of the table while Evelyn sat across from him. Not as his wife. Not as the quiet woman who had attended company dinners and stayed out of conversations. She sat there as the person everyone in the room was waiting for. The controlling shareholder. The final authority. The person who had been invisible because she chose to be. The board members did not treat her like a new arrival. They treated her like someone they had always known. That was the part Daniel struggled with the most. The world had not changed overnight. Only his understanding of it had. Before we discuss the acquisition terms, Evelyn said calmly, there are several issues regarding Cross Manufacturing's financial condition that need to be addressed. Her voice was steady, professional, nothing like the woman Daniel had underestimated at home. A financial report appeared on the screen behind her: debt obligations, delayed payments, declining contracts, leadership concerns. Daniel watched the numbers appear one after another. He wanted to defend himself. He wanted to explain. But every explanation sounded weaker before the facts. You knew about these problems, he said quietly. Evelyn looked at him. Yes, and you still let me run the company? The room became uncomfortable. Nathan, her attorney, looked down at his notes. Evelyn did not avoid the question. I did not let you fail, she paused. I allowed you to make decisions without using my influence to protect you from every consequence. Daniel felt the difference between those two statements. Before, he would have called it betrayal. Now, he was not sure. Because if someone constantly removed the consequences of your choices, you never had a reason to change. The board continued discussing the acquisition. Hartwell Capital had no interest in destroying Cross Manufacturing. That surprised Daniel. He had expected punishment. He expected Evelyn to take everything away. Instead, the proposal focused on restructuring, protecting employees, maintaining operations, replacing leadership where necessary. It was reasonable, almost fair, and somehow that made it harder, because Daniel could not portray himself as a victim. Evelyn was not trying to ruin him. She was trying to fix what he had damaged. During a break, Daniel followed her into the hallway. "Why?" Evelyn stopped. "Why what? Why are you doing this?" She looked at him. "Buying the company?" "No." Daniel shook his head. "Keeping people employed, protecting the business, even after everything." Evelyn was silent for a moment. "Because people who had nothing to do with our problems should not suffer because of them." Daniel looked away. That answer sounded exactly like her. It was the same reason she had helped his family business years ago. The same reason she had paid suppliers quietly. The same reason she had never used power to embarrass him. She cared about responsibility more than revenge. And that made Daniel feel smaller than any public humiliation could have. "I thought you were pretending to be someone you weren't," he said. Evelyn's expression changed slightly. "I was." Daniel looked surprised. She continued. "I was pretending to be someone who did not have power." The honesty caught him off guard. "Why? Why? Because I wanted to know who people were when they thought I had nothing to offer." The words were not angry. They were simply true. Daniel remembered every moment he had dismissed her, every time he had introduced her as someone who helped around the house, every time his father had joked that she was lucky to be part of their family, every time Lauren had called her ordinary. They had all been looking at the same person. They had just refused to see her. After the meeting, Daniel returned to his office, his old office, the place where he had once felt powerful. Now every object looked different. The awards on the wall, the photographs, the desk. They no longer represented success. They represented a story he had told himself. His phone rang. It was Lauren. For a moment he considered ignoring it. Then he answered. "We need to talk," she said. Her voice sounded different, less confident, more nervous. "About what?" "About everything happening." Daniel leaned back. "What does that mean?" Lauren hesitated. "I didn't know about Evelyn." The sentence immediately bothered him. Not because it surprised him, because he understood what it meant. "You mean you didn't know she had money?" Silence. That silence answered everything. Daniel closed his eyes. "You thought she was nothing too. That's not fair." "It is exactly fair." Lauren's voice became defensive. "I cared about you." Daniel almost laughed. Almost. But he was too tired. "You cared about the version of me you thought was becoming successful." "That's not true." "Then why did you tell me I needed someone who understood my ambition?" Lauren did not respond. Because she remembered. He remembered too. The words that had once sounded flattering now sounded cruel. She had not just wanted him. She wanted the future she imagined with him. A future built on status, money, recognition. And when she believed Evelyn was standing in the way, she helped him remove her. Daniel ended the call without another argument. For the first time in months, he did not feel pulled between two women. He saw the situation clearly, and clarity hurt. Meanwhile, Evelyn returned to her private office at Hartwell Capital. The building was quiet. Unlike cross-manufacturing, nobody there questioned her authority. Nobody there saw her as someone who needed to prove herself. But that did not mean she felt victorious. She looked at the divorce documents sitting on her desk. The marriage had become a legal process. Something that needed signatures, review, negotiation, protection. She touched the wedding ring on her hand. For a long time, she had kept wearing it because she believed commitment meant patience. But patience had limits. Love could survive mistakes. It could survive hardship. But it could not survive being constantly treated as worthless. Nathan entered the room. The board approved the first stage of the acquisition. Evelyn nodded. "And Daniel?" Nathan hesitated. "He requested a private meeting." She looked at him. "What about?" "He wants to discuss his position after the transition." Evelyn understood immediately. Not his marriage. Not his apology. His position. His role. His future. The same things he had cared about before. She picked up the divorce agreement and scheduled the meeting. Nathan nodded. Then he stopped before leaving. "There is one more thing." Evelyn looked up. "The public filing has been prepared." She knew what that meant. Once submitted, the acquisition documents would become available to shareholders and regulators. Her identity would no longer remain private. Everyone would know who owned Hartwell Capital. Everyone would know who had been behind the company saving Cross Manufacturing. Nathan placed the final document on her desk. The question is whether you want your name attached before the divorce is finalized. Evelyn looked at the paper. For years, she had hidden her identity to protect something personal. But now that same silence was protecting people who had hurt her. She reached for a pen. Then her phone vibrated. A message appeared from Daniel's attorney. The subject line made her stop. Emergency request regarding hidden ownership disclosure. Evelyn opened the message. The first sentence changed everything. Daniel was not asking for a meeting. He was preparing to challenge the ownership transfer. And attached beneath the message was a document claiming he had discovered evidence that Evelyn's hidden assets affected their marital agreement. For the first time, Evelyn realized Daniel was no longer trying to understand the truth. He was trying to use it. Daniel spent the entire night reviewing the documents his attorney had sent. At first, he believed he was looking for a weakness. Something he could use. Something that would prove Evelyn had hidden important information from him and that he had a legitimate reason to challenge the acquisition. But the longer he read, the more uncomfortable he became. There was no secret betrayal, no illegal transfer, no attempt to manipulate their marriage agreement. The documents showed something much simpler. Evelyn had built an entire financial structure before they met. Her inheritance had been placed into trusts. Her ownership in Hartwell Capital had been protected through legal entities. Every decision had been reviewed by attorneys, accountants, and financial advisors. She had not hidden her wealth to deceive him. She had hidden it because she wanted a life where people did not treat her differently because of money. Daniel stared at the screen. For years, he had believed he was the successful one, the provider, the person carrying the weight of their future. Now he realized he had measured success by visibility. Evelyn had measured it by responsibility. The difference embarrassed him. But embarrassment was not the only thing he felt. Fear was beginning to replace anger. Because if Evelyn's ownership was valid, then his attempt to challenge the acquisition could damage more than their divorce. It could damage the company he claimed he wanted to save. The next morning, Daniel arrived at Hartwell Capital earlier than scheduled. He expected to see the same cold professionalism from the previous meeting. Instead, he found Evelyn already working. No luxury display, no dramatic entrance. Just a woman sitting at a desk, reviewing reports. The same woman he had ignored for years. Daniel, she said without documents, surprised. He stood near the door. Evelyn nodded. And he struggled to answer. An apology felt too small. A defense felt impossible. I was wrong about some things. Her eyes finally met his. Some things? The question was quiet, but it carried the weight of every insult she had endured. Daniel looked down. I was wrong about you. For a moment, Evelyn said nothing. Then she returned her attention to the documents in front of her. Being wrong about my finances was not the worst part. Daniel knew exactly what she meant. The worst part was that you believed my value depended on them. The words stayed with him because they were true. He had not respected her more because she was wealthy. He had respected her less because he thought she was not. And that realization hurt more than losing control of the company. I never wanted this, Daniel said. Evelyn looked at him. What? To find out this way. She leaned back. Neither did I. The honesty surprised him. She was not enjoying his discomfort. She was not trying to make him suffer. She was simply tired. That was what Daniel noticed most. Not anger, not revenge, tiredness. The exhaustion of someone who had spent years trying to be valued by a person who never bothered to truly see her. Before Daniel could say anything else, Evelyn's assistant entered with a folder. Ms. Hartwell, the shareholder response reports are ready. Daniel noticed the title on the folder. The name attached to it was not Evelyn's married name. It was her family name, the name connected to billions of dollars in investments. A name that carried influence in industries Daniel had spent his career trying to enter. The assistant placed the folder down and left. Daniel looked at Evelyn. You were always this person, yes, and you just let everyone think you were ordinary. Evelyn gave a small nod. Ordinary people deserve respect too. That answer made Daniel uncomfortable because he knew he had failed at something basic. Respect. Not admiration. Not fear. Not status. Respect. Meanwhile, the situation inside Cross Manufacturing was becoming worse. Daniel's father, Richard Hale, had spent years presenting the company as a family legacy. But after the acquisition news began spreading among executives, employees started asking questions. They wanted to know why leadership had ignored financial warnings, why contracts had been lost, why debt had grown while executives continued receiving bonuses. Daniel had no answers, not honest ones. The same people who once praised him were now avoiding conversations. The same employees, who thought he was their future leader, were questioning his decisions. And for the first time, Daniel understood what Evelyn had been protecting. The company was not a trophy. It was people's livelihoods. That afternoon, Richard confronted him. "You let this happen." Daniel looked at his father across the office. "No, we let this happen." Richard's expression hardened. "Watch your words." "No." The response surprised both of them. Daniel had spent his entire adult life trying to earn his father's approval. But suddenly, that approval felt less important. You spent years blaming everyone else. The market, employees, competitors. But you never looked at the decisions we made. Richard stared at him. "You sound like her," Daniel almost answered, but he stopped. Because that was exactly the problem. The truth sounded like Evelyn because she had been right. Later that evening, Daniel met with his attorney again. This time he did not ask how to fight Evelyn. He asked how to handle the divorce properly. The attorney studied him carefully. "You understand this may not end the way you expected." Daniel nodded. "I know. Your previous position was based on the belief that she concealed assets improperly, I know. And now?" Daniel looked at the papers. "Now I know she was protecting herself." The attorney remained silent. Then he opened another file. "There is something else you should see." Daniel frowned. "What is it?" The attorney turned the document toward him. It was a communication from Hartwell Capital's legal department, a notice regarding the final acquisition review. Daniel scanned the page. His expression changed. "What does this mean?" The attorney answered carefully. "It means the board is considering removing you from any executive role after the transition." Daniel felt the impact immediately, not because he cared about the title. At least, that was what he wanted to believe. But because the title had been the last thing connecting him to the person he thought he was, the successful businessman, the man who had everything under control. His phone vibrated. A message appeared. It was from Evelyn. For several seconds, he stared at her name. Then he opened it. There was only one sentence. "Daniel, we need to discuss the document your attorney submitted before it reaches the board." His heart sank because he had not sent that document. He looked back at his attorney. "What document?" The attorney's face changed. A moment later, he opened the attached file. Daniel read the signature at the bottom, and his entire expression froze. The challenge against Evelyn's ownership had not come from him. Someone else had submitted it using his authorization. Someone who wanted to stop the acquisition. Someone who knew exactly what Evelyn's reveal could destroy. Daniel did not sleep after discovering the unauthorized filing. The document sat on his desk like evidence of a crime he had unknowingly participated in. His name was attached to it. His authorization appeared on it, but he had never approved it. The more he looked at the signatures and timestamps, the more one thing became clear. Someone had used his position, his reputation, and his desperation to create a legal challenge against Evelyn. Someone wanted the acquisition stopped, and they had counted on Daniel taking the blame. His attorney, Michael, reviewed the records again. "The authorization came through an internal account connected to Cross Manufacturing," Michael said. "But the access credentials were not yours." Daniel stared at him. "Can we prove that?" "We can investigate, but the bigger question is who had access." Daniel already knew the answer. Only a few people inside the company had enough authority to make something like this happen. People who had spent years protecting the family image. People who had more to lose than he did, his father, senior executives. The same people who had encouraged him to fight Evelyn before knowing the truth. Daniel felt something he had not expected. Not anger, disappointment, because he finally understood how often he had been used. For years, he had believed he was making powerful decisions. But many of those decisions had been shaped by people who benefited from his confidence and his pride. "I need to talk to Evelyn," he said. Michael looked concerned. "Be careful. If this involves the acquisition process, anything you say could matter." Daniel nodded. "I know, but this time, he was not walking into the conversation to defend himself. He was walking in because someone else had dragged her into a fight she never started." When Daniel arrived at Hartwell Capital, Evelyn was already aware that something was wrong. Her legal team had noticed irregularities in the filing before it reached the board. She was not surprised to see Daniel. She was surprised by his expression. He looked tired. Not angry, not arrogant, just tired. "I did not submit that challenge," Daniel said immediately. Evelyn studied him. "I know." The answer caught him off guard. "You know?" "The filing contained several inconsistencies," she said. "The legal language was designed to create suspicion, not to build a strong claim." Daniel sat down. "So you knew it was not me?" "I knew you were capable of making a mistake." Her honesty was uncomfortable. "But I did not believe you would intentionally damage your own company." Daniel looked away. A few months earlier, that sentence would have sounded like an insult. Now it felt like something he had not earned. "You still believe there is good in me." Evelyn was quiet. "I believe people can make terrible choices and still have the ability to make better ones." Daniel looked at her. That was the difference between them. He had judged people by their worst moments when it was convenient. Evelyn had judged him by whether he was willing to change. For the first time, Daniel understood why people respected her. Not because of her money, because of how she used power. "I want to help find who did this," he said. Evelyn nodded. "Then start by being honest." The statement was simple, but it carried weight. Daniel took a breath. "There are things I need to tell you." He explained the conversations he had with his father, the pressure from executives. The way people around him had encouraged him to challenge the acquisition. He admitted how easily he had believed them, how quickly he had assumed Evelyn was trying to destroy him. Evelyn listened without interrupting. When he finished, she looked down at the table. "Do you understand now?" Daniel frowned. "Understand what? That this was never about money." Her voice softened. "It was about whether you respected me when you thought I had nothing." Daniel had no answer, because there was no defense. Later that afternoon, Evelyn called a private meeting with her acquisition team. The situation had changed. The unauthorized filing meant someone was actively trying to interfere with the transition. Hartwell Capital could respond legally. They could expose the person responsible. They could move aggressively. But Evelyn wanted more information first. "Whoever did this expected Daniel to become the face of the fight," Nathan said. Evelyn nodded. "That was the plan. And now?" She looked at the documents. "Now they know he is not willing to protect them anymore." That was the first real shift in power. Daniel was no longer standing against her, but he was also not free from the consequences of his past actions. The divorce was still moving forward. The acquisition was still happening, and the damage caused by his decisions still existed. That evening, Daniel returned to Cross Manufacturing. The building felt different, the same hallway, the same offices, but the atmosphere had changed. Employees who once greeted him confidently now avoided eye contact, not because they hated him, because they were uncertain. Daniel understood that uncertainty. He had created it. When he reached the executive floor, he heard voices coming from the conference room. The door was slightly open. Inside were his father and two senior executives. They were not discussing the acquisition. They were discussing Evelyn. "She cannot be allowed to take control publicly," one executive said. Daniel froze. His father answered. "She thinks this is about saving the company." A pause. "She does not understand what happens when the Hale family loses control." Daniel slowly pushed the door open. Everyone turned. The silence was immediate. Richard looked annoyed. "You should knock." Daniel ignored the comment. "What are you doing?" His father's expression hardened. "Handling a business matter." "No." Daniel stepped inside. "You are trying to stop the only person willing to save this company." The executives exchanged uncomfortable looks. Richard stood. "You have no idea what you are talking about." Daniel looked at him. "For the first time, I do." The room went silent. His father stared at him. You think she has convinced you because she is wealthy? Daniel shook his head. No. He looked around the room. She convinced me because she was right. The words felt strange leaving his mouth, but they also felt freeing. Richard's face changed, not with anger, with realization. He knew Daniel was no longer the same person. You are choosing her over your family. Daniel paused. Then he answered carefully, I am choosing the truth over what is comfortable. Nobody spoke, because everyone in the room understood the shift. Daniel had finally stopped protecting the image of the family business. Now he was protecting what was left of its integrity. Before he left, his own phone received a notification. It was from Michael. A new document had been discovered during the investigation. Daniel opened it. His expression changed instantly. The document was a private agreement between cross-manufacturing executives, and at the bottom was the name of the person who had authorized the plan to block Hartwell Capital. It was not his father. It was not one of the executives in the room. It was someone Daniel never expected. Someone who had been standing beside him throughout the entire collapse. Someone who had convinced him that Evelyn was the enemy. Daniel stared at the name on the page, and for the first time he realized the person who betrayed him was much closer than he thought. Daniel stared at the name on the document for several seconds. He read it again. Then a third time, because his mind refused to accept what his eyes were seeing. Lauren. The person who had spent months telling him that Evelyn was holding him back. The person who had encouraged him to stop living like an ordinary man and choose a future with someone who understood ambition. The person who had claimed she wanted to support him. Her name was attached to the plan that could destroy everything. Daniel looked at Michael. Are you sure? Michael nodded. The authorization trail is complicated. She did not personally submit the filing, but she approved the legal strategy through an outside consultant. Daniel felt something inside him collapse, not because Lauren betrayed him. Some part of him already knew their relationship had been built on selfish expectations. What hurt was realizing that he had allowed himself to become exactly the person she wanted. Someone desperate for approval. Someone willing to believe anyone who told him he was better than he was. I need to speak with her, Daniel said. Michael hesitated. Be careful. If she knows you discovered this, she may try to protect herself. Daniel looked at the document again. I just want the truth. For the first time in a long time, he meant it. When Daniel met Lauren at a private restaurant that evening, she arrived confident. She still believed she had control. That was obvious. She sat across from him and smiled. I was wondering when you would finally call. Daniel studied her. There was a time when that smile made him feel chosen. Now it only reminded him how much he had ignored. You filed a challenge against Hartwell Capital. Lauren's expression changed slightly. Only slightly. I helped protect you. Daniel almost laughed. Protect me? Yes. She leaned forward. Daniel, do you understand what happens if Evelyn takes control? Your family loses everything. He looked at her carefully. She is saving the company. She is taking it. No. His answer came quickly. She is fixing what we broke. Lauren looked uncomfortable, because she had expected him to join her. She had not expected him to defend Evelyn. You sound different. Daniel looked down. I am. Silence filled the space between them. Lauren lowered her voice. You really believe her now? Daniel looked back at her. I finally believe the person who never lied to me. The words hurt her. He could see it. But he did not take them back. Lauren crossed her arms. She hid everything from you. She hid her wealth. Daniel paused. She never hid her character. That sentence stayed between them, because Lauren knew it was true. Evelyn had been the same person before and after the reveal. The only thing that changed was how people treated her. You knew she had money, Daniel said. Lauren looked away, a small movement. But enough. You knew. I suspected. Daniel felt disappointed, not surprised. You knew, and still called her ordinary. Lauren's expression hardened, because she wanted people to think that. No, Daniel shook his head, because you wanted to believe it. Lauren became quiet. For a moment, the confident woman disappeared, the woman who had judged Evelyn, the woman who had laughed at her simple clothes and quiet personality, the woman who had believed she deserved more because she thought Evelyn had less. You don't understand, Lauren said. I understand more than I ever have. Daniel stood. I understand that I spent years chasing respect from people who only respected power. Lauren looked up at him. And what about us? Daniel stopped. That question would have destroyed him months earlier. Now it only felt sad. There was never really an us. Lauren's face changed. You don't mean that, I do. He walked away before she could answer. For the first time, Daniel did not feel like he was losing something. He felt like he was finally admitting what was already gone. The next morning, Evelyn received the full investigation report. The findings confirmed what they suspected. Lauren had worked with several executives inside Cross Manufacturing. Their goal had not been to save the company. Their goal had been to create enough uncertainty that Hartwell Capital would withdraw. Then they planned to find another buyer, one who would allow them to keep their positions. Nathan placed the report on Evelyn's desk. They were willing to let the company fail if it meant maintaining control. Evelyn read through the details. She expected to feel anger. Instead, she felt disappointment, because she knew exactly how it happened. People became attached to power. Then they started protecting the position instead of the responsibility. Do we expose them? Nathan asked. Evelyn was quiet. This was the moment many people expected from someone with her wealth. A public attack. A display of power. A reminder that she could destroy anyone who crossed her. But that was never who she wanted to be. No. Nathan looked surprised. No, not yet. She closed the file. We follow the process. We document everything. We let the facts speak. Nathan nodded. That decision was exactly why the board trusted her. She had the ability to crush people. She simply refused to use power carelessly. Later that day, Daniel met Evelyn again. This time, he did not come as a husband. He did not come as a businessman. He came as someone finally accepting responsibility. I found out who was behind it, he said. Evelyn nodded. Lauren. Daniel looked surprised. You knew? I suspected. He sat down slowly. She used me. Evelyn looked at him. Yes. Daniel swallowed, and I let her. That was the first time Evelyn saw him stop blaming everyone else. Not his father, not Lauren, not the company himself. I thought being successful meant proving people wrong, Daniel said. Evelyn listened. I thought if I had enough money, enough status, enough respect, then nobody could make me feel small. He looked at her, but I spent years making someone else feel small because I thought she had less. Evelyn looked away for a moment. The confession mattered, not because it erased the damage. It did not, but because accountability was different from regret. Regret wanted forgiveness. Accountability accepted consequences. I am not going back, Evelyn said quietly. Daniel nodded. I know. I mean it. I know. There was sadness in his expression, but not anger. That was new. He finally understood that losing her was not a punishment. It was the result of choices he had made. Before Daniel left, Evelyn stopped him. There is still one thing you should know. He turned. The board meeting is tomorrow, Daniel frowned. About the acquisition? Yes. She paused. And your future role, Daniel understood. The final decision had arrived, not just about the company, about who he was after everything. That night, Daniel received an unexpected message from a board member. The message contained a private note, a request for him to attend the meeting early. There was no explanation, only one sentence. Before the board votes, you need to see what your father has been hiding. Daniel opened the attached file. His expression changed as he read the first page. It was not financial information. It was not about the acquisition. It was a record of a secret agreement made years earlier, an agreement involving Evelyn and his family. An agreement Daniel had never known existed. Daniel spent the entire night reading the agreement. The document was not long. That made it worse. There were no complicated legal explanations hiding the truth, no confusing financial language meant to distract him. It was simple, clear, and impossible to ignore. Years earlier, before Daniel had joined Cross Manufacturing, Evelyn's family investment group had quietly provided emergency funding to keep the company alive, not as a traditional loan, not as a rescue package, as a strategic investment. The agreement stated that Hartwell Capital would remain silent about its involvement unless the company reached a specific level of instability. Daniel stared at the signature page. There was his father's name, and below it was the signature of Evelyn's family trust representative. A trust that Daniel now knew was controlled by Evelyn. His hands tightened around the paper. His father had known. For years, his father had known who Evelyn was. He had known she was connected to one of the most powerful investment families in the country. And he never told him. The next morning, Daniel arrived at the board meeting early. For the first time in years, he did not walk into the room trying to impress anyone. He did not adjust his suit because he wanted approval. He did not prepare a speech about growth and ambition. He simply walked in carrying the truth. Several board members were already there. Nathan was standing near the window. Evelyn sat at the end of the table. She looked calm, but Daniel noticed something he had never noticed before. Everyone in the room respected her. Not because of lack of money, not because of her decisions. That was they trusted her decisions. That was the difference he had failed to understand. Power was not about making people afraid. It was about making people believe in you. The meeting began with the acquisition proposal. The lawyers reviewed the remaining terms. The financial advisors explained the risks. Then the chairman looked toward Evelyn. Before we vote, there is one matter we need to address. The room became quiet. Daniel already knew what was coming. The original investment agreement from years ago included a condition. A document was placed on the table. The Hartwell family retained operational control, but certain decisions required approval from the majority stakeholder if the company faced severe financial distress. Several executives looked confused. Daniel did not, because he finally understood. Evelyn had never been an outsider. She had been protecting the company from the beginning. The chairman continued, "That approval belongs to Hartwell Capital Holdings." He looked at Evelyn, and Ms. Evelyn Hartwell. Silence filled the room. Not everyone knew. Some executives looked shocked. Others looked embarrassed, because they remembered how they had treated her, how they had ignored her suggestions, how they had assumed she was only Daniel's quiet wife who stayed away from business. Daniel watched their reactions, and for the first time he understood the cruelty of what had happened. Evelyn had been sitting beside people who benefited from her protection while they treated her like she had no value. One executive cleared his throat. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Evelyn looked at him. "Because the company needed honest decisions, not people changing their behavior because of my identity." The answer was simple, and it exposed everyone in the room. Daniel lowered his eyes, because he knew he was one of those people. The board continued discussing the acquisition. This time, the conversation changed. No one interrupted Evelyn. No one dismissed her concerns. Every point she raised was carefully considered. Daniel noticed the difference. It was not that her ideas suddenly became better. They had always been valuable. People had simply refused to listen. After the meeting ended, Daniel stayed behind. Evelyn gathered her papers. "I know you read the agreement. My father knew, yes, and you knew he knew?" Evelyn paused. "Yes." Daniel looked hurt. "Why didn't you tell me?" Evelyn took a moment before answering. "Because every time I tried to talk about your company, you believed I was criticizing you." Daniel had no response, because she was right. "I thought you looked down on me," he admitted. Evelyn looked at him. "I never looked down on you, Daniel." Her voice softened. "I was waiting for you to stop looking down on yourself." The words hit harder than any accusation. Because they were true. Daniel had spent years believing he needed to prove he belonged, and while chasing that feeling, he had pushed away the one person who never asked him to prove anything. Later that afternoon, Evelyn met with her legal team. The divorce documents had reached the final review stage. Her attorney placed the papers in front of her. "There is still time to negotiate different terms if you want." Evelyn looked at the documents. For months, she had imagined this moment. She thought she would feel anger, satisfaction, maybe even revenge. But she felt something else. Relief. "I want a clean separation," her attorney nodded. "Even with your financial position, you are choosing not to pursue additional claims?" "No." Evelyn looked out the window. "I spent too much time being valued for what I could provide. I do not want the rest of my life defined by proving what I own." That decision surprised even her lawyer. But Evelyn knew exactly why she made it. She did not need Daniel's downfall to prove she had been hurt. She needed peace. Meanwhile, Daniel returned to cross-manufacturing. The atmosphere had changed. People who once ignored him now approached carefully. But Daniel did not enjoy it, because he finally understood what Evelyn had experienced. The sudden respect felt empty. He did not want people to treat him differently, because they feared losing something. He wanted to become someone worthy of respect without needing power behind his name. That evening, Daniel received another message from the board chairman. The subject line immediately caught his attention. Final ownership review. He opened it. The attachment contained updated shareholder records. Daniel expected to see Evelyn's ownership percentage. Instead, he saw something else. A hidden clause, a clause connected to the original investment, a clause that had never been activated until now. His eyes moved down the page. The condition was clear. If cross-manufacturing entered a forced acquisition process due to internal misconduct, Hartwell Capital had the authority to remove certain executives and restructure leadership. Daniel stopped reading, because one name appeared under the list of executives subject to review, his own. He sat there silently, not because he was angry, because he finally understood the full cost of his choices. Then his phone rang. It was Evelyn's attorney. Daniel answered. The lawyer's voice was calm. "Mr. Hale, there is something you need to know before tomorrow's final review." Daniel stood. "What is it?" A pause followed. Then the lawyer said, "Your father left instructions regarding the company's future, if this situation happened. Those instructions were sealed years ago." Daniel felt a chill. "What instructions?" The lawyer lowered his voice. "The document names Evelyn as the person your father trusted to decide whether you should remain part of the company at all." Daniel did not sleep after the call. The words from Evelyn's attorney kept repeating in his mind. Your father left instructions. He had spent years believing his father's greatest disappointment was that he was not aggressive enough, that he did not have the instincts of a businessman, that he needed to become harder if he wanted to protect the family company. But now Daniel wondered if he had misunderstood everything. Maybe his father was not waiting for him to become someone else. Maybe he was waiting for him to become someone better. The next morning, Daniel arrived at the attorney's office before the scheduled meeting. Evelyn was already there. She sat across from him with a folder in front of her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They were still husband and wife legally, but emotionally, they felt like strangers who knew each other too well. Daniel looked at her carefully. For years, he had seen Evelyn as the quiet woman who stayed home, avoided attention, and preferred simple things. Now he realized he had mistaken humility for weakness. "I want to understand," Daniel said. Evelyn did not look away. "Understand what?" "My father, the company, you." She remained silent. Daniel continued. "I spent years thinking you did not believe in me." Her expression softened slightly. "I believed in you more than you believed in yourself." The answer hurt because it was not angry. Anger would have been easier. Anger would have given him something to fight against. But Evelyn was simply telling the truth. The attorney entered a few minutes later and placed a sealed envelope on the table. "This was held with the company's legal documents," he explained. "Your father created it several years ago. He instructed that it only be opened if the company faced a situation where ownership control became uncertain." Daniel stared at the envelope. His father's handwriting was on the front. The sight alone made his chest tighten. The attorney opened it carefully. Inside was a letter, not a business document, a personal one. Daniel read the first few lines. "If you are reading this, it means my greatest fear happened. The company was not destroyed by competition. It was weakened by people who forgot what responsibility meant." Daniel stopped. The words felt directed at him. The attorney continued reading aloud. "Success without humility creates people who believe they are entitled to what others built." Evelyn lowered her eyes. She had heard these words before. Daniel had not. The letter explained that his father had noticed the company changing after Daniel became more focused on status, appearances, and outside approval. He had seen executives using family connections instead of earning trust. He had seen Daniel slowly move away from the values that built the business. Then came the part Daniel feared most. The letter named Evelyn. "Evelyn Hartwell has protected this company without seeking recognition. She has never used her position to control my family. She has only stepped forward when necessary. Daniel closed his eyes. His father had known. He had known the woman Daniel ignored was the person keeping everything together. After the meeting, Daniel walked outside alone. The city felt different. Nothing had changed around him. The buildings were the same. The traffic was the same. But his understanding of his own life had changed completely. For the first time, he saw how much damage came from pride. Not ambition, not wanting success. Pride. The belief that someone else's value depended on what they could provide. Meanwhile, Evelyn returned to Hartwell Capital's office. The atmosphere was different from years before. Employees greeted her. Executives asked for her opinion. But she did not enjoy the attention. She had never wanted to be treated like royalty. She wanted to be treated like a person. Her assistant entered with another file. "There is one more issue." Evelyn looked up. "What is it?" The acquisition review team found irregularities in Cross Manufacturing's financial records. Evelyn frowned. "What kind of irregularities?" "Several decisions were made during the last 2 years that increased short-term profits but created long-term risk." She opened the file. There were several approvals, several contracts, several signatures. One name appeared repeatedly. Nathan Hale, Daniel's cousin, the same person who had encouraged Daniel to separate from Evelyn, the same person who had constantly suggested that Daniel needed a more powerful image. Evelyn studied the documents. She was not surprised, but she was disappointed. Because Nathan had not simply damaged the company. He had used Daniel's insecurity to do it. That afternoon, Daniel met Nathan at the company headquarters. Nathan immediately noticed something was different. "You look serious." Daniel placed a folder on the table. "What happened with these contracts?" Nathan glanced at the papers. His confidence disappeared for a moment. "What are you talking about?" "The acquisition team found financial decisions that put the company at risk." Nathan leaned back. "Don't blame me for problems that existed before." Daniel watched him carefully. Months earlier, he would have accepted that answer. He would have looked for someone else to blame. But not anymore. "Did you know about Evelyn?" The question changed the room. Nathan's expression froze. "What do you mean?" "You knew she was connected to Hartwell Capital." A few seconds passed, then Nathan smiled. A small, uncomfortable smile. "I knew she had family money." Daniel's face hardened. "You let me believe she was just someone with no influence." Nathan shrugged. "You wanted to believe that." The answer cut deeper than Daniel expected, because there was truth in it. Nathan had manipulated his assumptions, but Daniel had allowed those assumptions to exist. That evening, Daniel returned home. The house felt empty, not because Evelyn was gone, because he finally understood how alone she must have felt while living there. He walked into the room where she kept her personal documents, not to search through her things, not to invade her privacy. He only wanted to understand what he had missed. On the desk was a small box. Inside were old notes. Business suggestions Evelyn had written years earlier. Ideas she had never forced him to read. Ideas he had ignored. Daniel picked one up. It was dated from when Cross Manufacturing first began struggling. She had predicted the exact problems they were facing. Now she had offered solutions, and Daniel had dismissed them because he thought she was just a wife, not a person with experience. Not a person with insight, just someone he believed was beneath him. His phone rang. It was Evelyn. He answered immediately. "Daniel." Her voice sounded serious. "There is something you need to know before tomorrow's shareholder meeting." He stood up. "What happened?" A pause followed. Then Evelyn spoke. "The review team found evidence that someone inside Cross Manufacturing intentionally hid financial problems before the acquisition process began." Daniel felt his stomach tighten. "Who?" Another pause. Then she answered. "The person who benefited most from making you believe you were losing control." Daniel looked toward the folder on the table. "Nathan." Before he could respond, Evelyn added one more sentence. "And Daniel, the evidence does not only affect your cousin." The silence that followed felt heavier. "What else?" Her voice lowered. "The records show someone used your approval to authorize decisions you did not fully understand." Daniel froze, because there was only one signature that mattered. His own. The shareholder meeting began with a silence that felt heavier than any argument. Daniel sat at the end of the table. no longer pretending he had control over everything around him. For the first time in years, he listened. The evidence was presented clearly. Financial reports had been altered. Risk assessments had been ignored. Several decisions had been pushed through with incomplete information. Nathan had used Daniel's position as a shield, but the investigation also showed something else. Daniel had not intentionally damaged the company. He had trusted the wrong people because he was desperate to prove himself. That distinction mattered. The board did not excuse his mistakes, but they recognized the difference between arrogance and corruption. Then Evelyn entered the room. Everyone stood. Not because she demanded respect, because they finally understood what she had always represented. The chairman addressed the room. Evelyn Hartwell is the controlling stakeholder behind Hartwell Capital Holdings and the primary decision-maker regarding the acquisition agreement. The truth was no longer hidden. The woman Daniel had introduced for years, as someone who preferred a quiet life, was the person who had protected the company from collapse. The woman his family called ordinary was the person with the power to decide its future. Daniel watched the room react. Executives who once ignored Evelyn now avoided eye contact. People who had judged her simple clothes and quiet personality now realized they had been measuring the wrong thing. But Evelyn did not look satisfied. She looked tired. Because being proven right did not erase the pain of being treated as invisible. The board discussed the final restructuring plan. Nathan was removed from all leadership responsibilities pending further legal review. His decisions would be examined, and any consequences would follow through the proper channels. No public humiliation, no revenge campaign, just accountability. Daniel respected that more than anything. After the meeting, he found Evelyn alone in the hallway. For several seconds, he could not find the right words. "I'm sorry." The apology sounded small, because it was. There was no sentence powerful enough to undo years of disrespect. Evelyn looked at him. "I know you are." Daniel swallowed. "I should have seen you." Her expression changed slightly. That was the hardest part. She looked away. "Not that you didn't know my family's name. Not that you didn't understand my position. The hardest part was that you stopped seeing me as a person." Daniel lowered his head. He had no defense, because every painful moment came back. The way he dismissed her advice. The way he allowed his family to treat her like she was beneath them. The way he believed a richer, more impressive partner would make him feel more successful. He had searched for status and almost lost the person who gave him peace. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Daniel said. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "I forgive the person you were trying to become." Daniel looked at her. "But that doesn't mean I can return to the marriage we had." The words hurt, but they were honest, and for once, Daniel respected honesty more than comfort. The divorce was finalized several weeks later. There was no dramatic courtroom battle, no public fight. The settlement was handled professionally. Evelyn kept what was rightfully hers. Daniel accepted responsibility for his choices. They walked away without destroying each other. That was the one thing Evelyn refused to let happen. She did not want Daniel ruined. She wanted herself free. Months later, Cross Manufacturing began recovering. Under new leadership and with Evelyn's guidance, the company returned to stability. But Evelyn changed one thing. She stopped hiding. Not because she wanted attention. Not because she wanted people to know she was wealthy. She simply stopped shrinking herself to make others comfortable. She attended board meetings openly. She spoke with confidence. She made decisions without apologizing for having the authority to make them. For years, she had lived quietly because she wanted people to love her for who she was. She still believed that. But she had learned something important. Being loved did not mean allowing people to disrespect her. Daniel changed too. He left the company's executive role and began rebuilding his career without using his family name as protection. It was difficult. Some people judged him. Some questioned his abilities. But for the first time, he faced those challenges honestly. He no longer wanted success because he needed to prove he was better than others. He wanted success because he wanted to become someone he respected. A year later, Daniel and Evelyn met again at a business event. They spoke briefly. There was no anger, no bitterness. Only two people who had once loved each other and had learned painful lessons from losing that love. Daniel looked at her with genuine respect. Not because she controlled billions. Not because she could change his future. Because he finally understood her value had existed long before he knew her power. Evelyn smiled. She was not the woman waiting to be recognized anymore. She had already recognized herself, and that was something no betrayal could take away. The world had once seen Evelyn Hartwell as the quiet wife standing beside a powerful man. They were wrong. She had never been standing behind him. She had been standing on her own. Sometimes the greatest loss is not losing money, status, or power. Sometimes it is losing someone who valued you before anyone else knew your worth. If this story touched you, share your thoughts about Evelyn's choice. Do you think she made the right decision by choosing peace over returning to a broken marriage? Let us know in the comments, and join us for more unforgettable stories of hidden identities, betrayal, and second chances.